Hi, everybody. Good evening and welcome to the Finding You podcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, June 26th, 2025. So, in anticipation of America's Independence Day, I wanted to do something on theme, on brand. And so, what I'm talking about tonight is rebellion, individuation, and connection. I love the idea of remembering that our country is based on the value of rebellion as an important part of what's in our DNA, and that most of the people that have made a difference in the world have gone through a significant rebellion from the status quo. That's how progress is made. So, tonight I'm going to present some ideas around rebellion, child development, our own relationship to it as children, as people, even in relationship to me, and talk about how we can incorporate these values and ideas and the complexities that come along with this. So, before I get into that, let me go with my housekeeping items for this evening. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. The next available Finding You, we just announced this, is August 13th through 17th. That is one that I will be running. That might be the last one that I'll run for this year. So if you're interested in attending, we've just added the date August 13th through 17th. I will be running that. Then we have September 3rd through 7th, October 1st through 5th, and on throughout the rest of the year. Our Finding You program is our flagship program that's based on family of origin issues and helping you understand where the context is that you're stuck in, because it looks so present, it looks so here and now, but oftentimes it is our histories that are keeping us stuck. If you're interested in working with a therapist or a coach who's trained in the Finding You attachment-based model, you can contact us by going to our website or emailing us at info@findingyouprograms.com. We also have the opportunity for feedback, for requests on these broadcasts, for live question and answers that I'll be doing next time. Or if you're interested in a private intensive for a family, for a couple, or even for an individual, go to our website or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. This fall, October 12th through 17th, I'm going to be running a 5-day workshop with my daughter Emma at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. That's just outside of the city, probably about an hour and a half outside of the city. And it is something that is based on the book, The Audacity to Be You. It's a little bit different than our Finding You intensive, and it's not quite the podcast. It's somewhere in between with psychoeducation exercises. If you are interested in attending this 5-day workshop for around $500, the E-Omega website at eomega.org, that's the Omega Institute at eomega.org, is the place to go. Click on the workshops and then look on the Audacity to Be You. Really soon we'll be announcing the Finding You Inner Circle. That's a subscription and a support of the Finding You podcast for a year subscription of live participation of a couple of episodes a month that won't be available to the general public. Again, go to our website or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com and become part of the Finding You Inner Circle. It'll be $100 per year, $10 a month for a ton of content. All right, let me get into tonight's broadcast. I love this quote from James Hollis from his book, Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life. He says, to become a person does not necessarily mean to be well-adjusted, well-adapted, approved of by others. It means to become who you are. We are meant to become more eccentric, more peculiar, more odd. We are not meant to just fit in. We are here to be different. We are here to be individual. I was teaching a group of teens this week on the idea of the Jungian shadow, that part of our unconscious where we put the parts of ourselves, the aspects of ourselves that our context, the big people around us as children, find inadmissible. Later on in life, we find that same experience with peers and with our cohort, with society, and those are the places that the shadow is the place where all of those parts of ourselves that if we thought we embodied would cause us to be judged, rejected, or abandoned. So I was teaching the teens about this, and I was saying to them, in many ways, the rebellion that led to your placement in a residential treatment center was the longing of your soul. Because you couldn't find a way to navigate the separation and the individuation that is required of or asked of by your soul, you resorted to rebellion. And yes, the symptoms that you are displaying, the symptoms that have been pinned on you and accurately attributed to you are dangerous and unhealthy. But underneath that is the desire to incorporate and to become more whole. So tonight, I want to talk about rebellion as a core American value, really the fundamental principle that our country was built upon. I loved reading about the development of the musical Hamilton and how he decided to incorporate rap into it and take that idea, that culture, that bravado into it, because in many ways he said that was who our founding fathers were. They were these arrogant rebels, these intelligent, arrogant people who wanted to self-govern, and they were willing to die for it. They were willing to go to war over it. And it becomes such a drive for us to become who we are that if we don't answer that call, and this goes for all of us, we will eventually display symptoms. Sometimes those symptoms can be physiological and can be life-threatening. We can develop tumors and illnesses and autoimmune disorders if we don't listen to our soul, if we don't give it a voice, if we don't find a way to express ourselves, our authentic selves. One of my favorite leaders, teachers about rebellion was Steve Jobs. I loved the book on his life written by Abraham Isaacson. And one famous story that he talks about is how they came up with their slogan in the 1990s. This famous little poem that goes like this. He said, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs and the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones that do." In adolescence, in childhood, we have to find a way out. We have to find a way out from under our parents' fear and the subsequent control that comes with it. Some people choose to swallow everything and to become ultra compliant, to become cooperative, to in essence, take on the persona of becoming a people pleaser. I can have some of that in me too. I can see that in me. And some people don't have the stomach for it, don't have the temperament for it. And so their choice is to rebel. In fact, one of the boys asked me the other day, why is it, if our goal is to fit in, if we have this innate drive to belong, why is it that some people dress and act in ways that overtly repel the people around them? And my answer was because it gives them back a sense of their own power. Instead of trying to fit in, trying to please your parents, trying to fit into the status quo and what the culture wants, and the anxiety that comes with that, you sink your own ship, because at least then you are the captain of your own boat. At least then you're not at the mercy of what other people think and believe. And so that pushing away, in fact, that rebellion is evidence of our deep desire to belong, of our deep want to fit in and to become part of something, to be lovable. When I talk about individuation, this is one of my soapboxes or my pet peeves. And people hear about, they translate the word to mean something around selfishness or self-centeredness. In fact, there are people sometimes quoting self-help authors and teachers. But individuation in the psychoanalytic sense is not about selfishness. It's about becoming honest and having integrity with yourself. It is being who you are in virtually, of course, with some appropriate limitations, becoming who you are in all the contexts and all the relationships, telling people how you feel and what you want. I was just sitting with my oldest son this week, just prior to, by the way, for those of you who don't know, I became a grandfather this week. I have a new granddaughter. And just a couple of days, I was visiting with my son, who, by the way, as a teenager, was rebellious. Not as much as some of his friends. In fact, I was sure that all of them were going to end up in jail. I was convinced, as were the parents in our neighborhood, because of their mischievousness, that they're breaking in, the graffiti, all the things that they were doing. I wish I could have seen 15 years into the future, because now I look at all of those boys, and all of them, from my vantage point, are happy and healthy with families and rewarding careers, and they're finding ways to express their core self creatively in business, in their chosen field. Many of them have children and have beautiful families. So part of what they were rebelling against in our community was this overarching shame and control and pressure to fit in. So individuation is not selfish. Individuation can be quiet. In fact, somebody who is individuated in a healthy sense, in that healthy way that we talk about it psychoanalytically, is kind, is generous, is compassionate and understanding. Because to individuate, you have to make peace with yourself. And if you've made peace with yourself, then you are essentially at peace with everybody else, because everybody else is more like you than they are different. Hollis says, so often the idea of individuation has been confused with self-indulgence or mere individualism. But what individuation more often asks of us is the surrender of the ego's agenda of security and emotional reinforcement in favor of humbling service to the soul's intent. To individuate is simply to embody your deepest sense of self, your deepest and truest self that you can find or that you have available to yourself. That is individuation. Now remember, words like individuation, words like self-care, words like boundaries, healthy boundaries, those kinds of ideas will feel like selfishness to people who are living in the old way. For people that are that have an unhealthy, anxious attachment to others, to their parents, self-care, boundaries, individuation seem wrong and evil and bad and selfish. So if you yourself, not only your child, are seeking for some peace and find yourself on this journey with me in this broadcast, either live or listening to the recording, if that is your story, if that's what you're seeking for, you can expect that the people around you that love you, that care about you, will give you those change back messages of you're being selfish, you're being self-centered. You have to face the thing that you most fear in order to find the greatest treasure of all, which is you. So that's why words like individuation are so threatening to people who are out of balance. And by the way, who haven't studied what individuation is in a classical sense. Carl Jung said rebellion is that necessary impulse pushing one toward autonomy and self-realization. It has nothing to do with being insensitive to others or gorging yourself at the expense of other people around you. But it does mean that there are going to be times when I have to take care of myself and I can't be there for you. I can't extend myself to you. And I get to decide when that is. And to realize that, right? To realize that next level of growth and awareness and consciousness, I'm going to have to likely stand in the face of accusations, emotional manipulation, labels, name calling from people that are still operating in the old patterns with me, or in the old patterns that we were all operating within. One of the paradoxes I've thought about in teaching this evening, talking about this on this podcast, is that there's a paradox here. I want you to listen to the feedback, to the relationships around you as feedback, how people are responding to you, to consider what they're saying. But at the same time, if we simply outsource our sense of self to the feedback of others, particularly to our children, we have fully foreclosed on the task or the project of finding ourselves. So it is a paradox to listen but not be held captive by it, to hear what people are saying and feeling and not necessarily swallow it whole. Chew on it, digest it, reflect on it, go to therapy, ask questions, explore it. Listen to what the child is not saying, what they cannot say, either because they don't have the words or because the context, that is you. If you are the person of the parent in this, or if you're the child, or you're thinking about this as your own rebellion against, even as a 55-year-old person, rebelling against the teachings, the values, the context that you grew up in, whether you're thinking of it that way. Listen to what the child is not saying, what they cannot say, either because they don't have the words or because the context will deem what they have to say inadmissible. Eventually, you have to stare into the abyss. Eventually, you have to step onto the path that you can't see where it's going. Eventually, you have to go into the cave where it is darkest. Eventually, you have to face the parts of yourself that you have successfully avoided up to this point. And if you don't, your relationships, your intimate relationships will call upon you to know yourself better. Somebody once said, Edinger once said, whenever one finds himself in a state of conflict with someone or with a situation, he should entertain the hypothesis that the psyche has propelled him into that situation in order to generate consciousness. I said to the boys yesterday, they asked me, how do we recognize the shadow? And I said, it's in your conflict. It's in the people that you're annoyed with. It's in the people who are displaying behaviors, attitudes, saying things that you hate or despise. That is your shadow. Those are the parts of yourself that you have not made peace with. You could still have the value that is different from them, but to hate, to be in conflict, to be agitated by, frustrated with, tells me that there's some undone work there. There's a lack of authenticity there. So if you have to set a boundary with those kinds of people, and it doesn't come from a shadow and a projection, your unhealed parts, you'll be able to do it with compassion and understanding, not out of necessarily rage or anger or hatred, but out of self-love, self-respect, and probably, or possibly, even by extension, respect to the other person. We talk about attachment so often. We talk about that we really talk about the first phase of attachment, the first task in attachment, early childhood. That's the task, or the task in early childhood is to welcome the child, to provide a safe, a warm, welcoming environment where the child feels like they belong. They experience compassion and patience, where the parent is able to mentalize. That means that the parent is able to imagine what the child might be thinking and feeling, not reducing the child to good and bad behaviors, but rather understand and value what's going on inside of the child. Perhaps one of the most common complaints that I hear when people are doing their family of origin work at our intensives is that their parents cared only about them getting it right, about getting good grades, about their accomplishments, and didn't seem very concerned at all with how the child was feeling. So that early childhood phase is about understanding and listening to the child. And by the way, it is the greatest contribution you can make to your child's resilience and self-esteem. Maybe the most common question that every parent has is, how do I foster and encourage self-esteem in my child? It is this kind of connection. We call it attachment. Not the way the Buddhists talk about attachment, where you're controlling, but being connected. It's just a word that psychologists chose many years ago. Probably could be replaced with a better word today. That's what we think about when we think about attachment. But there is a second stage that happens in adolescence, at least at large in adolescence and in young adulthood. And that is the letting go phase, letting them become themselves. I will not be able to emphasize too much today the value of adopting the mentality that your children, quoting the prophet, the book The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, your children are not your children. They are not your children. As I watched my son, my oldest, care for this new baby that came into the world just this week, I was having this profound experience of love and connection, and also this experience that he's not me. He's going to bring to bear so many different gifts and ideas that I never would. I said to him, I've told the story on these broadcasts about when he moved out as a teenager and how it broke my heart. Just the grief of losing your firstborn to the world, to their own life. And how my therapist was able to encourage me along by saying he needs to get away from you as far as he can. And as I was visiting with him, like I said earlier this week, and watching the life that he created that I never would have created. The version of the life that he lives is not something I would have ever created. And I was simply being just enjoying and being tickled by how different it was with his chickens and his dogs, his animals, his art studio, his various projects, both artistically and in home remodeling. The whole thing was so different than anything I could have planned. And I said to him, I said, you did a really good job of individuating, of rebelling. I didn't use the word rebellion, but I said individuating from me. And you built a life that I never could have imagined. And I'm so happy that you did that. And in a sense, I'm glad to sit here and to witness the creation of something that is so beyond my context, my way of thinking, my way of operating. I find the novelty of it absolutely joyful to behold, to watch, to witness. One of my favorite quotes about this stage of separation is this idea that the ultimate test, that James Hall says, the ultimate test of the family is not whether it provides safety and predictability. That's the early stage. But whether or to what degree each person can leave it freely and return freely as a larger person. And while the first stage requires a lot of patience and resources, the first stage of attachment of providing this safe container, the second stage is no less difficult. The second stage requires you to stand on your own, to experience their departure as a natural part of their development. So much of what we see in adolescence between parents and children is the difficulty that both of them are having at individuation, at becoming themselves and recognizing themselves as two separate individuals. And sometimes the reason that children may, notice the words I'm choosing, sometimes and may, sometimes the reason the children may rebel is because they are so affected by the anxiety of the parent and their fear of the separation. I've had parents talk to me about the idea about worrying about whether or not their children would abandon them if they executed a difficult rule or consequence. And I've said over the years, it's not the right word. Children can't really abandon their parents. It's not the word that we would use. They can decide, and I'm going to be talking about this next week, they can decide to have no contact. But they don't really abandon you. Only parents can abandon children. Children just decide to live their life independently as they mature, as they age through childhood. So part of the question is, how well are you doing with the individuation process? How well can you love and let go at the same time? And again, this is nuanced and complex and ambiguous, but it's worth your consideration to ask these questions. Knowing how to love, Thich Nhat Hanh says, when we love without knowing how to love, we hurt the people that we love. He said, you must love in such a way that the person that you love feels free. My wife asked me a few weeks back, just randomly, in a very beautiful way. Nothing was happening. She said, do you feel free within my love? And I said, some ways, more than ever, some ways not. And we talked about it for a little bit. I read this quote to you all the time. You secure attachment in the psychological sense as the delicate tangle of feeling safe, interconnected, independent, and free. Joseph Campbell says we can't really talk about the most important things. We don't have language. It falls short. So in essence, we tell stories and we use analogies and metaphors to talk about the divine, the sublime, the universe. When Amber Daslin wrote, secure attachment is the delicate tangle of feeling safe, interconnected, independent, and free, the paradoxes within her statement are their beauty. And as you think about what I have to say tonight, I'm going to say this more than once this evening. Don't listen to me if you think I'm giving you a should about how you should raise your children. Don't listen to me. Rebel against me. My idea in these broadcasts is to share with you how I'm thinking about these things for your consideration. But I've had just as many clients do something I never would have suggested or might have even warned against, and have it lead to something absolutely beautiful in their lives. I've had that happen just as often as the times that I have suggested something and they haven't done it. So it's important to understand that rebellion, it's one of my favorite values. It's why the music that children listen to, and this is a timeless statement. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to parents in the 1940s or 50s or 1920s or 2020s. The music of children is meant to offend and scare parents, because the individuation, the differentiation, the rebellion that they're trying to negotiate isn't going very well. So they identify with things that look very contrary, very opposite of what the parents. They are meant to offend. They are meant to push you away. The more gracefully we can individuate with our children, the less that they will need to push us away with these more overt, more frightening messages and behaviors. Jamie Gill's exploration of rebellion during adolescence serves as a vital aspect of the identity development. She argues that rebellion is not merely a phase, but a crucial step towards self-discovery and independence. Rebellion is at the heart of creativity and freedom, she states, highlighting how stepping away from parental expectation allows individuals to forge their own identities. This journey into self-awareness is integral for breaking free from the limitations imposed by past experiences and societal norms. As I have grown, just aged, I suppose, my attitude toward my children and parenting has evolved. And I am more capable of holding the idea that they are not my children today than I was before. I saw myself as an engineer who was responsible for essentially programming my children into be the type of people, the good people, if you will, that I thought people were supposed to be. I didn't have a sense when I was young that my job was to help them find their uniqueness, to learn to expand large enough to stay connected and hold something very different than me, to stretch myself, to not necessarily assume that my knee-jerk reaction to their choices, to their rebellion, was right, to question myself. In a sense, rebellion is a stage of immaturity, or at least in the context of a certain context, is something adaptive that we have to resort to. Pickard said, although the young person thinks rebellion is an act of independence, it actually never is. It's really an act of dependency. Rebellion causes the young person to depend on their self-definition and personal conduct on doing the opposite of what other people want. That is why the antidote of rebellion is the true independence offered by creating and accepting a challenge. The young person deciding to do something hard with themselves, for themselves, in order to grow themselves. The teenager who finds a lot of challenges to engage with and who has parents that support those challenges doesn't need a lot of rebellion to transform or redefine him or herself in adolescence. So as we start to watch our children rebel, sometimes they're trying to pull you to a greater level of consciousness, to get you to face something you haven't dealt with. Sometimes they're trying to break free of the familial lineage of trauma, a programming that is fundamentally unhealthy. Most of the people that listen to this podcast, in some sense, are rebelling against mainstream culture and their own experience as children with parents. So if it's good for you, it's good for them. It's just terrifying. and they can do crazy things. But so did we. And sometimes the mistakes lead to the most beautiful things. Gil wrote, akin to the strict father problem, this kind of traditional autocratic parenting style that's referred to as strict father, as the strict father issue. Akin to the strict father problem is the dilemma of the over-criticized child. When parents disapprove of a child, rebellion is often the result. The child's defiance, their resentful, angry pushback, is best understood as expressing vengeful disapproval of their parents' disapproval. In the long run, it is your child's job not to concern themselves with what you think about them. In the long run, it is our jobs to not concern ourselves with what other people think about us. The slogan from Al-Anon that I often quote, which states, what other people think about me is none of my business, illustrates this idea. So the child is at the mercy of the parent's anxieties and fears. And if the parent is too controlled by their own fears, if they're acting from a place of fear constantly, that thing that they imagine is love is really fear, and that fear is suffocating and crushing for a child. So we have to go take care of our fear somewhere else. I had 2 sessions in the last 2 weeks where one of the participants was late to the session. It was a Zoom session. And in both instances, I took the opportunity to talk to the remaining person, the person who showed up on time, and to hear them vent about their feelings, their frustrations, about the goings on of the previous week. It was just naturally set up. Can you hear me? Those of you that are on here, can someone just say yes if they can hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Looks like yes. Okay. I'm just going to keep going. Rebellion is kind of a last resort. Jung said that the first step in individuation is a tragic guilt. The first step in individuation is a tragic guilt. That itself is a tragic idea. That in order to become one's self, we have to face a powerful wave of guilt. What would it be like if we could parent in such a way or love our partners in such a way that for them to express, to embody their truth wouldn't cause this tragic guilt that Jung warns us is coming or inevitable? How amazing would that be? Rebellion is kind of a last resort for the child who feels powerless. Powerless to show their feelings, to resist the demands placed upon them, to have their voice heard, understood, and considered. I have heard some therapists say, in particular contexts, that oppositional defiant disorder is not really a disorder, but a normal response to a sick system. If this is true, then there are no disorders, since all diagnoses are responses to a system that seems in one way or another to not meet the needs of the child. So the question that I'm inviting you to consider is, when your child rebels, is that feedback that would be best served for you to listen to? You would be best served to listen to it as feedback about your parenting instead of a departure from the right way. Martin Luther King famously said that a riot is the language of the unheard. It's that idea that if I can't get my voice heard, the reason we teach communication skills is to give a pathway, by the way, a stage to have the feelings that are unexpressed or expressed through symptoms, to give them their due, to give them their moment in the sun. That's why we do that. But I will tell you, when I do that, inevitably, invariably, parents struggle with their child's feelings. They want to talk them out of it, say how it's not true, give counterexamples. When I speak to parents about their child's defiance, I emphasize relationship and connection. These are the important things, and these take deep work. They take your own individuation. You will only be able to be connected to your child to the extent that you have looked inside of yourself. Otherwise, you're limiting yourself to the ability to connect to the things that are just at the surface or the pleasant things. You've got to go into the dark places. You've got to deal with your own shadow. You've got to deal with yourself in some therapeutic context. You've got to unlearn and deprogram your parents, your history's programming. For if you don't do that, you're going to be unconsciously passing on generational trauma. We all do it. We all do it. Every one of us therapists, every one of us therapy clients, every one of us people do it. So my emphasis is on the relationship and the connection as the primary glue for supporting a child on their developmental journey. Inevitably, when I talk about these things, the parent will ask about behavior, about teaching the child how to respect others. I like to explain that morality, as I see it, is not something that one can impose on a child through discipline. In fact, if a child behaves well or good or cooperatively, morally, quote unquote, because of external discipline, they are, in essence, stuck at a fairly young age, developmentally, morally speaking. Morality is best taught by teaching the child how to feel. And you do that by learning how to feel yourself, learning how to feel and express and embody and discuss issues, emotions, perspectives that your context, that you grew up in, found inadmissible. And when you can sit with yourself, your, I like to call it your horrible, rotten self, which isn't, of course, horrible, rotten at all. But when you can sit with yourself, you can sit with your child. And when somebody learns to feel deeply, they will recognize feelings in others, and kindness, compassion, and love will flow from there. Because it's not as clear, because it doesn't have the same teeth that control or threats or consequences have, it terrifies parents because it's the long game. But I find over and over and over again that the resistance that we are all up against is this belief that we're supposed to be good. That the goal in life as a human is to not be bad, but to be good. And that's in contrast to what I understand every psychological theory tells us about humans and human behavior. The goal is to be whole. But this idea about being good, about not making a mistake, about not hurting people, about not being that kind of spouse, that kind of parent, that leads to the defense. That leads to defending yourself. That leads to not expanding, not growing, not exploring. The epigraph of my book, taken from one of Jamie's books, why were we, each of us, taught the notions that we had been taught about being correct when these exact notions ensured our failure in the world? The great paradox of my life is that when we are trying to be good, we will hurt the people that we love or ourselves. But when we become who we are, we will have a natural source of love and compassion and kindness and generosity towards others. It doesn't make sense on the surface. I understand it deeply now. But I myself had to cross over a bridge unknowing what was on the other side because the context I was living in, both as a child and a young adult, were absolutely unbearable. Sometimes when I'm teaching this stuff, parents say to me, but I did all of this. I'm not perfect, but I was a pretty good parent. My response to them is, congratulations. You must have a great deal of peace. Serenity and peace are the result of healthy parenting, not well-behaved children. The question you've been getting, that you have about getting it right, suggests that doing it right causes someone else to change. I'm sure that you were great. And your child's struggles are not about you. Their struggles are their own. That's the great paradox with the separation and the connection. It's only when we separate, it's only when we accept the premise that our children are not our children. It's only when we accept that premise, that idea, that we can be close to them. From the journey of the heroic parent, good parenting is its own reward. Good parenting is good living. It means being a better man, woman, person, friend, self, boss, or employee. Healthy parenting is the end, not the means to an end. Healthy parenting is the end, not the means to an end. If we fail to embrace, no matter how painful or scary, the journey of struggling parenting a struggling child, we will also miss the treasure that journey has to offer. For me, parenting struggling children offers many gifts, including increased compassion for others who suffer, clarity in recognizing our boundaries, and improved self-care. Parenting skills and principles don't change children. They change parents. And that change in a parent can have a wonderful impact on a child. So whether we're thinking about your own childhood or your own parenting task, we have to begin to unlearn. And part of what our children are asking us to do is to reconsider everything that we assumed was true, everything that we were taught. I joke about this with my wife sometimes, that therapy is, the idea of therapy is that everything that you were taught was just made up. That's why I don't want you to follow what I say. I would like you to consider, I would invite you to consider the ideas that I have, but figure it out. And when people say to you, when people quote me and they say, Brad would tell you to do this, they're wrong, because I wouldn't tell you what to do. I would talk about principles involved in making the decision. I would give you ideas, questions that would lead you to think more critically so that you can figure it out. Because heaven knows my vision is limited. I can only see my paradigm. I can only see my world. It's expanding since I had my first child 32 years ago. But I expect it to continue to expand. So following me or following any therapist is foolish in a sense. True self-discipline in children, morality in children, isn't because of the consequences. It's because the parent that is raising them has individuated themselves, and therefore is possible of true and deep connection with parts of the child that are difficult and uncomfortable, that have a different shape and color than the one that we were expecting or used to. True discipline comes from the internalization of loving limits that come from a parent's sense of self, from their own work. Gill said, if the parent is capable of empathy, the focus will be on the child's thoughts and feelings. If empathy is not present, the only focus can be on the child's behavior. The result may be a well-behaved child who is nonetheless not heard and emotionally not included. We often objectify children down to their behaviors. We reduce them down to behaviors. And this work that I'm talking about tonight, it asks for a much more complex approach to parenting, one that can't be easily dictated. You cannot paint by numbers and paint a masterpiece. And when you find yourself agitated, angry, and frustrated, that is a call for you to do more self-care. My wife asked me just recently when I was upset, she said, is this a bandwidth issue? And I didn't want to say yes. I wanted to pin it on somebody else. I really did. I did not want it to be my limitation, my humanness that was causing my frustration. I wanted it to be about something else that somebody else had done. And as I started and stuttered to defend myself, I said, yeah, it's a bandwidth issue. It's always a bandwidth issue. When you become frustrated or disappointed with a client, I teach therapists, or anyone for that matter, you have, in a sense, lost some contact with them. Because if you could really see them and connect to them, then you would not be frustrated because you would understand them. Attachment theory tells us that a person's sense of well-being is the result of having a parent who provided an adequate container. And an adequate container is the mind of the parent, where the child experiences himself as welcomed and safe. If the parent was able to hold the child in her mind, that is, tolerate the child, then the child's experience of themselves is, I am okay. But when the parent's limitations, like the ones I was feeling recently that I just alluded to, when the parent's limitations are expressed in disappointment, disgust, or anger, the child is likely to interpret these as, I am not okay. And in order to manage this feeling of dread that comes when my parent is upset, I will learn to put away those things that seem to be upsetting. Or, in the case of somebody who's more overtly rebellious, I will embody everything that my parents hate. Because separating from them in a graceful way doesn't seem to be in the cards for me and for them. So I will light this village on fire, if you will. So rebellion is a call. Individuation is a call to discover your truth, to paint your masterpiece, which is your life. And most of this learning is unlearning. Robert Bly said it poetically. He said, it's not our job to remain whole. We came to lose our leaves like the trees and be born again, drawing up from the great roots. Born again is an analogy of something we can't speak about because it's so profound, so transcendent, so sublime, that is beyond any words, any adjectives. And so to lose our leaves and to be born again means that we become something almost unrecognizable to our current self. The idea that I have for you tonight is that rebellion is a worthy value. To understand that your journey is a rebellion. This podcast is a rebellion. The things that I teach, which are not necessarily coming from me, mostly, of course, sourced, like I often share with you, that they're an invitation into your individual journey that only you will be able to create. And you don't owe an explanation to anybody. You don't owe an explanation to your parents or to anybody. But if you're open to the feedback that's available to you in your close relationships enough to consider them, you might just find some expansion and some greater peace, some greater capacity. Ultimately, more and more love. Most prophets are rebels. Yeah, we look at them 100 or 200 or 3,000 years later, 2,000 years later, and we revere them. But they were rebels in the first place. They were speaking to the mainstream culture and saying, this is not right. Things are messed up. We need to change course. Artists do the same thing. As we approach the 4th of July, Independence Day in America, our country was built on the value of rebellion. James Hollis once wrote, we were all raised to be nice, really nice. A reflexive niceness is a pathogenic loss of a connection to the soul, and it's not nice. The opposite of reflexive niceness is called authenticity or integrity. I had a client just tell me recently that I was being kind or nice to them. I said, I'm not being necessarily kind or nice. I'm just telling you how I see you. And if it feels good, that's great. It's because it's true. This is how you are. So what are the take homes? It's to realize that rebellion is a wonderful value. In Star Wars, you remember, it was Luke Skywalker's rebellion against his father that saved his father. That's the message, one of the messages of Star Wars. Once Darth Vader saw the cost of the generational transmission of trauma onto his son. All of this, of course, is cloaked in metaphor in the Return of the Jedi. Once he saw the damage of the intergenerational transmission of trauma onto his son from the Emperor, he was finally willing to change, finally willing to rebel. And so if you won't do it for yourself, do it for your child. If you won't rebel against your parents because you're too concerned about them, do it for your child. And if you're willing to put your parents before your children, I'll just send love to your child, right? That's when we're the most lost. When the grandparent becomes the priority over the child. And the work is to do your individual work, to do your individual work. Individual work is the basis of therapy, I'm convinced. We do couples work and family work to stitch together our individual work, but the foundation of all of it is the individual work of each member of the system. Once you make progress and can see yourself more clearly, which means you face the parts of yourself that you told didn't exist, or that you imagined didn't exist, or that you were told were unacceptable. Once you've learned to make peace with those, then you'll be able to see your child, because your child won't be in the service of your ego, of you being good, because you will have overcome that need in this context. Don't do what anyone tells you to do, including me. My broadcasts are an attempt to introduce you to a way of thinking for you to try it on and see if it fits. And if what I say to you in any context doesn't feel right to you, then don't do it. Throw it in the garbage. Every day. Stop listening. Stop reading. Get help as you work through the separation phase with your child. It's traumatic. It is traumatic. We raise these children, they're with us every day, and then all of a sudden they're supposed to go out in the world and leave us? Even when they go to college, which is seen as a rite of passage that's associated with healthy development in this country. One day, I'm telling them to be home at 11 o'clock. The next day, for all I know, they're sleeping on the floor in the fraternity. I don't know. It's terrifying. I can remember being angry at the universe when my children went away to college because I thought it was such a stupid plan. And they were going away to do something that was for them, following their bliss, following their dreams. So we need help. What will feel natural and healthy to you might not be. And that's why listening to a compassionate, patient, empathic other can help you to deconstruct the context, the contrived messages from your childhood. How did you escape childhood? Was it by being a people pleaser? Was it by reflecting back to your parents that they are good parents? Were you encouraged? Was your rebellion welcomed and allowed? Did you have to burn the entire house down like I did, metaphorically, to get free? You know, there's this idea that rebellion is cutting off their nose to spite their face. But here's the problem with that analogy, or self-sabotage, sometimes it's called. The task is individuation. The task is to become who you really are. The task is to become a human being, a person. That's what the myths tell us and teach us. So you're not cutting off your nose to spite your face. That implies that you're getting rid of something and you're hurting the big picture. The child is seeking for what their soul's desire is. They're seeking. When I was asked just the other night, there's some family in town because of the grandbaby. And I was talking to the other grandfather, and I was saying, he asked me a question, and I was saying to him about my own drug use as a teenager. I said, I think I was just always searching for a spiritual context. I think I was just always on a spiritual journey. And since I had no one to guide me, I looked into the dark corners for it. But ultimately, I was searching for the sense of transcendence that drugs temporarily give you. That sense of well-being and safety that drugs temporarily give you. I tell kids The fact that you're taking drugs tells me that you want to have the feeling that comes when one is spiritually connected to life, to the divine, to yourself, to your soul. That's the feeling the drugs give you. So I don't think of it as self-sabotage. I think of it as serving a deeper, larger purpose. And I don't think of it as cutting off your nose to spite your face. I think of it as trying to find out who you are and being willing to get rid of anything that stands in the way of that. And ultimately, our job as parents, as partners, even in the context of our own childhood, is to have compassion for our and for other people's otherness. And to realize that if somebody's different than you, doesn't mean that they're wrong. And if somebody scares you, it doesn't mean that your response is coming from love. And the rebellion sometimes is the wisdom of the inner child who just won't have it anymore. All right, folks. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, The Audacity of You, are available on Amazon. July 23rd is full for Finding You. The next available Finding You is August 13th. I will be running that one. And then September 3rd is the one that's following. That has a few people already in it. So if you're interested, sign up soon. These are filling up a month or 2 in advance. If you're interested in a coach or a therapist who's trained in this model, go to our website or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. All of their inquiries, feedback, any inquiries about private intensives, go to our website or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. I'm going to be running the Audacity to Be You workshop at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, on the Hudson, near the Hudson. Go to eomega.org, click on the workshops tab, and then the Audacity to Be You, and sign up there. Very affordable 5-day workshop. I'm really excited and a little bit nervous about this next topic that I'm going to be teaching next week, next Tuesday. I'm going to be talking about when people choose to go no contact with their family. I might be talking about you, or I might be talking about your children. But when people choose to go no contact with family or no contact with parents, I'm going to be talking about that. It's kind of an extension of this, but it's very specific. I'll be talking about that next Tuesday, July 1st, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. If you have any questions, if you want to send in questions in advance, any requests, or any information, contact us at info@findingyouprograms.com. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. I hope something I said today made sense or sparked a new thought in you. I hope it is an invitation to reconsider the way that we thought about rebellion, our own or our children's. And for and on behalf of the children that you love and that love you, and all the people that you love and love you, thanks for showing up to these broadcasts, because your participation in this kind of work makes all the difference in the world. It is an act of rebellion, in a sense. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.